Now live, Chairman.
Thank you. And if everybody could keep themselves muted, please, unless they're actually going to be speaking or looking to speak. So welcome. It is just 10 o'clock now. So I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting, this virtual meeting of the River Hamble Harbour Management Committee. Obviously it is being held remotely, so we're all in attendance through Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being live streamed, so if you feel the need to watch it afterwards, you can watch it as many times as you like. What I'm going to do, first of all, just for the record, is to name the members who are present and or at least should be in attendance for the meeting, and ask them to confirm that they are indeed there. So then we'll just know that everybody can see and hear what it is they need to do. And if there are any votes required, of course, generally there aren't, but the verbal votes will be coordinated by Emma, who's looking after us today. The County Council standing orders continue to apply. So as I said earlier, please do keep your microphone muted unless you've been called to speak. And you may be visible on the screen to the public and other members, even if you're not speaking. So just be aware of that, please. So what I'd like to do now is to call members and see who is in attendance. So please, if you would, as I call you, if you could just unmute just for that moment and just confirm that you are with us. So I'll start off with the County Councillors. Roger Huckstep.
Councillor Roger Huckstep is here.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Councillor Fred Burkett. No sound. I'm guessing he's not with us yet. Councillor Mark Cooper.
Good morning. Yes, Mark Cooper is here.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Rod Cooper.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Tonya Craig.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Morning. Councillor Pal Hare.
Good morning. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Rupert Curl.
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, I'm present. Thank you.
Councillor Stephen Philpott. Not hearing anything there.
Yes, sorry, trouble with the microphone. Yes, I'm here, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Lance Quantrill. Not hearing anything there.
Ahoy from Hailing Island. Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you now, Lance. Thank
Good. I'll mute.
Thank you. Yes, please mute yourself again. Rupert Boissier. Rupert with us? Not hearing anything. Councillor Trevor Cartwright.
Yes, good morning. I'm here.
Yeah, it's just like being at school, isn't it? Councillor Frank Pearson.
Good morning, Chairman. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Jane Rich. Yeah, okay. And John Selby.
Good morning, President.
Right, thank you. And Nicola Walsh.
Good morning, yes, present.
Okay, that's lovely. Well, that's the members. So, Emma, are you happy that you know who's here?
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, all right. So we move now to apologies for absence, which is the first item on the agenda. We've had apologies from Trevor Bryant. Emma, are you aware of any other apologies?
I'm not aware of any further apologies.
Okay. Now move to declarations of interest. Now, I'm not going to kind of work around the room. We know what we normally have as declarations of interest. I'm sure you're all well familiar with those. Does anybody have anything additional that they wish to declare or otherwise remove an interest? And we'll try and do is get you to raise hands if hand raising works on this system, which I hope it does. So does anybody wish to make any changes to their declarations of interest? Not seeing anything. Okay. All right, let me just get back to my Notes. Okay, next item then is item 3, which is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Seems a very long time ago now, the 13th of March, and I need to ask whether members agree that these do form a correct record. So I guess the easiest thing is, anybody not agree? And if you don't, please put your hand up if you've got a problem with anything there. Not seeing anything, so I'm going to take it, unless somebody shouts at me, that the minutes are agreed. Now move on to item 4, which is deputations, and I can confirm that we have had no deputation requests for today's meeting. In terms of chairman's announcements, I've probably said enough already, so we'll pass on from those, and we'll move to item 6, which is the Marine Director and Harbour Master's report and current issues. This is on page 7 of the agenda pack, and Jason will be presenting this item. And as a reminder, what we're being asked to do in this one is to note and to support the contents of the report so that it then goes off to the River Hamble Harbour Board. So Jason, if you'd like to introduce the item, obviously please take it that members have read it, and it is a very long report. So I'd really like the main part of the opportunity to be for members to be able to ask questions, but please, Jason, if you provide any opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. It is a very long report, and the shape of this report has changed, I think, for the better, with the facts and matters of what we've been doing on a daily basis placed in an annex. I thought it might be helpful to put in place in graphical format, an illustration of incidents that have taken place, the types of incidents that have taken place since the lockdown. But the period under report has been dominated really by coronavirus response, the effect on river users, and in particular, what has happened since those lockdown restrictions were lifted. We've had a lot of correspondence from river users and members of the public complimenting the Harbour Authority on sustaining its unbroken marine safety management service throughout the coronavirus outbreak. And we have, as a team, been we've been on duty throughout that period, providing advice to commercial businesses which have needed to keep running throughout the period, and we've supported that through helping them liaise with other adjacent harbour masters through whose waters traffic might pass. In the course of lockdown, people behaved very well, I would say. We had a very small number of incidents where people took our advice, which was broadly interpreting government advice on travel regulations. So that was very pleasing. Since the coronavirus restrictions were lifted, we have seen an explosion, I think it's fair to say, of enthusiasm for returning to the water in all shapes and sizes. Most notably in two areas. One of those has been paddleboarding, largely up towards Swanwick, which has had an effect on the land as well as on the water. I will not dwell upon what has gone on the land, namely car parking and the enthusiasm of people, but rather centre on what has gone on the water. Paddleboarding stocks, that is to say, if one were to take up paddleboarding, going to the shop and buying one, those stocks virtually ran out over the course of the few weeks after the lockdown period finished. Lots of people have gone out and bought paddleboards and entered the water in and around Swanwick, with the effect that the traffic congestion in that area was problematic for us. We worked with local paddleboarding enthusiasts. Paddleboarders don't know the rule of the road, and came up with a system of signage. And the additional control measures we put in place not only included that signage, which directed them out of the main channel, but also spent a good deal of time up there advising people on what safe looked like, trying to get them out of the main channel and then single file, not cross the channel in clumps. But there is, of course, a responsibility on larger motorboat owners under the international regulations for the prevention of collisions at sea to take such action as will best avoid a collision. So there's a dual burden of responsibility up there, but that's been a focus. The paddleboarding explosion has largely died down over the past few weeks, in part because of the weather, in part because people have returned to work, and in part because anecdotally some people have become bored with paddleboarding. The paddleboards that they have been out and bought are appearing at much lesser cost on eBay. Nevertheless, paddleboarding, I think, will be with us next year too, so we'll be ready for that. But the signage we put up has been warmly received. The other area that we've seen an increase in activity is over the launching at Warsash Slipway in particular of jet skis. Now, that brings additional challenges with regard to speeding in the mouth of the river because those craft are very powerful. The people who come to launch their jet skis from Warsash are not necessarily familiar with the Hamble. They've come from further afield where other slipways that they would normally use are closed. That has two effects on us. One, it involves a good deal more education to those who launch, and we have in place a jointly agreed with Southampton Harbour Master briefing set of notes which we give to people that not only involves what is expected within the River Hamble, but also what jet skiers should not do when they're entering Southampton water. That includes wake jumping of red jet ferries, which causes additional burdens to be placed on the skippers of those vessels. So we've agreed that, and we brief, and that seems to have had a good effect. We have seen a number of jet skiers willfully speed, and we've worked jointly with the police under their operation called Wavebreaker, to put in place additional control measures and prosecution packs. And for your information, at the moment I'm pursuing 5 prosecutions for 3 jet skiers and 2 rigid inflatable boats, the details of which I will not cover today. The corollary of the jet ski additional activity has been an increase in income. Now, that's reassuring. With river users and visitors not coming to the river, it was a real concern that we would not accrue income at the rate that we needed to. We have each year around about £45,000 of income from visitors and launching fees, and by the end of July we would normally have accrued £18,000. Clearly we haven't done that this year. But what is remarkable is that in a very short period, therefore since the end of lockdown to the end of July, we'd accrued money at a much greater rate and had brought in just shy of £11,000. Now those, the rate at which we bring in money has continued favourably, and we're getting closer to where we would be in a normal year. We don't know at the moment what the future will bring with regard to further restrictions, and so it's worth keeping an eye on that and encouraging people to act responsibly, and encouraging visitors when we do have an opportunity to come to the Hamble, and we're doing that. So I'm quite pleased with that response. The next area, and probably the area I will probably invite most questions, I'm not sure, is around the antisocial behaviour that we've been facing. Colleagues will be deeply concerned, I'm sure, at the nature of some of those incidents that have taken place. We are doing our very, very best, along with the proper authorities, most pertinently really the police, of course, because antisocial behaviour is criminal activity, and the Eastleigh Borough Council's team which tackles underlying causes, social causes of antisocial behaviour, and also Hamble Parish Council. But the incidents of antisocial behaviour take place at 3 particular locations. They take place widely, but broadly they take place in the main in 3 locations. The first among those is at Hamble Quay, Hamble Village, where groups of up to 70 youths will congregate. And the ages we're talking about are between, again, 9 and 19, 20, that sort of age. A mixture of boys, girls, who will come down to the jetty and engage in Class B drug smoking. There'll be underage drinking, fighting, criminal damage, theft. And we are, as a Harbour Authority, only citizens whose primary duty is the support of the police in the execution of their duty. And we work very closely with the support of not only the Marine Police Unit, but also the new beat constable over there and his team to make sure that names are taken, evidence is provided such that action can be taken. But it has been a real burden over there at Hamble this year since lockdown finished. We've also seen similar activity up at Bursledon, where the A27 bridge has, as usual, brought with it a summer full of jumpers, and they will jump into the river and on occasion miss boats by not very much. So again, presence there helps. Signage is already on the bridge, and we work very closely with the police to make sure that those who are caught are looked after and given the right advice. At Eastlands, it's that's to say north of the motorway bridge, there is a farmer's field, a private farmer's field opposite, which is used opposite Eastlands Boatyard, which is used for picnicking, and young people will swim across the main channel, block it, and climb on pontoons and take glass bottles with them, throw things at boats and so on. And again, this is criminal activity. But what I want to get across to colleagues is that because we are in a linear river and Hamble is at one end of it and Eastlands is 2/3 of the way towards the top of the river, getting between all of those areas and being called from one area to another to deal with antisocial behaviour has a rather large stretch on our resources. But I want to reassure members too that we have not compromised through sheer hard work, frankly, not compromised our ability to produce and deliver a robust marine safety management service. So it's been a particularly busy period, and I've been struck by the number of people at both ends of the spectrum who said you've had your feet up over the past 8 months. Well, I rejoice in telling them that is not so. It's been the busiest year I have experienced in my 5 years here. It's been interesting because we've had to balance our resources to meet the challenges we face. But we've managed to do it, I think, fairly securely and fairly robustly. And I've been delighted with the way that river users have responded to advice, in particular the various notes that we as a Harbour Authority sent out individually to river users and to businesses to explain the lockdown from a marine safety perspective as it took place. So that week-long period was very interesting. We managed to, I think, get the right information out as fast as anybody anywhere. So I'm particularly pleased with the team here. That's all I'll say on my report, unless there are any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jason. So now I can see, I think, all participants on the screen in this rather flashy new version of Teams, which has a large gallery option. So, but you do either raise your hands electronically or wave your hand in the air, and we'll take any questions or comments. So, anyone? Right, Councillor Rod Cooper, you're first.
Good morning, Jason. Thank you for a very, very comprehensive report. Your team, from first-hand experience, have been exemplary during this coronavirus pandemic and situation, and have always been there and willing to help, and I can't speak highly enough of them. My concerns are, again, from first-hand experience, you mentioned in your report about the antisocial behaviour, which, again, first-hand experience, it's exploded. Certainly from, where I've been at Hamble Jetty. In a conversation that we previously had, you spoke about a joint approach with other agencies with regard to tackling this. Can you tell me what's been the progress with regard to that?
You are muted, Jason. You need to unmute.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. The progress with the police has been promising. The Marine Unit in particular, because of they have one of their number is the ex-Hamble beat policeman. They know the area very well, and the way in which they're managing the Solent, because they have wide responsibilities, as everybody will know. They are responsible down to Lymington one way for all the Isle of Wight and out towards Chichester. So they have quite a large water space, operate from Hamble Point Marina, but they divide up the responsibility for those individual areas, Cowes, Hamble, etc., among individual officers who put a good deal of personal effort and investment into knowing the space, knowing the characters. And I myself, on one day, I think it was the 16th of June, I took a dim view of two, it turned out to be local young men from Warsash, who had ignored one of my administration ladies who's in her 60s. And she had challenged them when they attempted to barge down on our pontoon to go to fish. Now, in itself innocuous, but fishing within the COVID guidance was not supported, and we were simply giving them that advice. My administration lady was faced with a barrage of insults, expletives, and verbal threats. And called me. I hadn't heard it, and these two young men headed down to the fisherman's jetty and carried on doing it, which is a private jetty in any case. So I challenged them, and I was threatened with physical abuse, and there were by that stage 3 of them. At which point we managed to call the Marine Unit, who were close by. They gave false names, apart from one who it was very simple to track down the true identity of the 2 real belligerents. And we did that with the police, which led to the police paying these young chaps a visit at home. And in the words of Mark Arnold, the one he visited at home was, within 25 years of police service, the most obnoxious and rudest young man he had ever come across. Nevertheless, it enabled him now to bear down on that individual and serve on him an official warning for his behaviour. And that's been effective because they haven't shown up here again. We haven't seen them again. That is a good thing. So where the police do involve, that really is a little vignette that illustrates the sort of close liaison work that gets the job done. We have over at Hamble worked with the police closely, as I say, and many local people, particularly young mothers, have been hugely grateful that when the police aren't there, because they are pulled across the coastline and inland as well, we provide some form of reassurance that somebody with authority is taking some action. We recognise fully our limitations in that, and we make sure that we fulfil our responsibilities under the Port Marine Safety Code. But I think we also have a duty which in a way enhances our standing here as an organisation that won't stand up to nonsense. So I'm quite proud of that, and I think my team who face those sorts of threats and challenges on a daily basis in the height of the good weather I can't speak highly enough of them.
Thank you very much for that, Jason. Rod, if you could drop your hand, please, that would be helpful. And does anybody else want to ask any questions or make any comments on this report? Nicola Walsh next, please.
No questions, actually, just to reiterate everyone else's comments and how positive and how strongly we believe that the whole team have been really, really great this summer. It's been noticed by me particularly. I have an office that overlooks the River Hamble, and I've seen it for myself. So thank you, and on behalf of the members also. What I also wish to really congratulate Jason in particular on was how he handled the whole reopening of the river, because obviously having no access to the waters, having no access to the boats, and having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis, I know that you lobbied very hard for us to reopen the river, and in the safe way that you did it. I thought it was fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Nicola. Anybody else wish to comment? Okay, then in that case, I think it would be appropriate that we do place within the minutes our gratitude and admiration for the work that has been done by the Harbour staff during this period. I'm aware it's been difficult working conditions, I guess even in those months with nobody else on the river, or almost nobody else, must have been a bit bizarre to say the least. So I'm sure it's not been the easiest of times. So Jason, please do pass our gratitude to all members of your staff, and if we can ensure that we minute that as well, I hope members will be happy with that. Right, we now need to move to make a decision on this. Now, we could do this by asking Emma to kind of call a register and make sure everybody's in favour, but given that everyone is visible, if your video is on, I can see you all on the screen. Are you happy to support the recommendations? You want to signify such, either putting up your thumbs or raising your electronic hand. I think I'm seeing all hands up. Everybody happy? Emma, are you happy with that?
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Then the recommendation is agreed. So thank you. We now move on, and we now move to item 7, which is the environmental update. Page 37 of the agenda pack is to have your attention, and we'll be being asked again to note and to support the contents of this report, so it can go off to the River Hamble Harbour Board, and then to ask Alison Fowler to present the item.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, this is key environment updates since the spring. I'm happy to go through them individually, or if members have read them, I'm happy to take questions on any particular one.
Well, I'm sure all members will have dutifully read your report, Alison, so unless there's any specific points you want to draw our attention to, then I'll ask members if anybody has any questions or comments on this. Please put up your hand and I will call you. Councillor Philpott.
Thank you, Chairman. Just trying to lower my hand and activate the microphone at the same time.
Thank you.
Not something I'm very good at, really, is multitasking. Just a question, if I may, just for an update. It's not really addressing the report as such. We had a previous environment report from Alison, and we discussed, you might recall some while ago, about the runoff from the motorway into the river. And there was a great deal of concern. We were working, I think at the time, or a number of agencies were working at the time, for an alternative means of preventing that, the runoff of small pieces of plastic, microplastics, and rubber and other detritus getting into the river. I just wondered whether there's any update on that, if that's possible, Jen.
Thanks, Steve. Alison, can you help?
Yes, of course. There's two elements to this. The direct runoff from the motorway itself is through several outlet pipes that come off the bridge directly into the river. And we've been working with Highways England and their contractors and consultants, and that is going to be addressed as part of the current smart motorway work that is going on. So when they do the work to the bridge, that will be addressed. Those will be closed and rerouted. So that will remove that concern with that direct runoff from the bridge. Longer term, Highways England will be bidding for funding to look at a project which will address the wider sort of catchment drainage to the river from the motorway. There are outfalls on either side of the bridge coming into the river, and it's how they will address those with a balancing pond and other engineering solutions. But yes, good news is that the immediate runoff from the bridge will be addressed during the current Smart Motorway programme over the next year.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Is that okay, Steve? Okay, thank you. Any other questions or points? Okay, then if not, if I can look to you to signify your agreement to the recommendation, please. I'm seeing lots of hands. That is agreed. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on, and we're moving now to item 8 on the agenda, and that is the River Hamble final accounts for 2019-2020. This is page 43 in your agenda packs, and the recommendations are set out on page 43, and there are 3 of those. So if I can now look to Jenny and to Jason to present this item to us, and again, on the assumption that members have read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So yes, the main purpose of this report is to present the accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2020, and that's both in the statutory format, and as required under the Harbours Act, and also the management accounts, which compares the actual outturn to the budget. We'll also spend a little bit of time talking about the proposed revised budget, a quick look at the outturn for this financial year as well, in view of the unusual times we find ourselves in, and then finally just a very quick update on the balances that are held within the 3 reserves. So if I start with the statutory accounts, which are included as Appendix 1, and that's paragraphs 14 to 16 of the main report. So as I say, these are a requirement under the Harbours Act that we need to prepare these and submit them to the Department for Transport. As usual, I'll spend a little bit more time focusing on the management accounts rather than the statutory accounts, and there is a reconciliation there between the figure on the profit and loss within the statutory accounts to the surplus within the management accounts in Appendix 5, so you can see how those tie up. The statutory accounts show a loss for the year of £76,000. However, I think it's important to note that that includes one-off planned spend on projects of £64,000, which is mainly the new Harbour Assist system, and those are funded from reserve balances. And also we have in there the £35,000 depreciation charge, which is an accounting adjustment to recognise the diminishing value of the Harbour's assets. So if I move on to the year-end management accounts, which are in Appendix 2, paragraphs 17 to 25 of the report. So the final outturn for the year is a £19,000 surplus, which is more favourable than the revised budget, and that will be used to part fund the £35,000 annual contribution to the asset replacement reserve, together with a £16,000 draw from the general reserve. The total income from the year at £628,000 is an improvement on the budget and the projected position that we brought to the committee in December. And that's mainly due to the part-year effect of the changes to the charges that we agreed at the board in January, and particularly the dry dock launches and also visitor income. However, that has been offset by total expenditure being over budget, mainly due to staffing, with increased overtime costs covering a vacant seasonal post. We'll then move on to the revised budget, which is shown within Appendix 6, or the proposed revised budget, I should say. And at the January board meeting, so the board did approve in principle that we would amend the budget to take into account the changes to the charges. So this is effectively just putting that into place. And it's the new flat rate annual charge for the dry dock launches that is expected to generate the bulk of the additional income at approximately £35,000. So we're proposing to increase the income budget by that amount. At the board, it was discussed that any additional income as a result of these changes could be added to the asset enhancement reserve. However, what I have proposed in the report that is in view of the relatively low balance in the general reserve, that instead we put that extra income into the revenue reserve to top that balance up to what would be a budgeted £52,000 by the end of this financial year. And I should also say, I have noticed in the report, and my apologies, in paragraph 29, it does state that the additional income could be added to the asset replacement reserve to take advantage of future opportunities, and that should of course be the asset enhancement reserve. So I will get the report updated for that. Just a very quick look at the forecast outturn for the current financial year, which is in Appendix 6 and also paragraphs 30 to 39. And it's worth saying that overall the position is looking relatively positive, with expenditure currently expected to be on budget and a shortfall against the visitor income of the £7,000 that Jason had mentioned earlier. But hopefully we will look to see if we can pick that up over the remainder of the year. There are a few things that we need to be a bit cautious of within that forecast outturn. So the impact of COVID-19, and so far we've talked about the £7,000 impact on visitor income. Potentially there could be further pressures depending on what happens with future lockdowns or restrictions, and that could well filter through to staffing if we need additional overtime costs to cover staff sickness or staff self-isolation if that does occur. Also worth highlighting in the report I mentioned, we'd added an inflationary figure for pay inflation of 2% within the budget. At the time, a figure of 2.75% was being discussed when the report was written, and that has now been agreed at the 2.75%. So there'll be a little pressure there of a few thousand on what we originally budgeted for. And as always, it's worth noting that the legal and democratic services charges are based on the actual time incurred. So if we have any particular issues within the year, those well could go up or down, as the case may be. I also wanted to flag, we talked last report back in March about the past pension cost payment being removed from this financial year. So we were paying £25,000 per year, following the actuarial valuation back towards December last year. That payment was removed from this financial year onwards, but it was always subject to the next actuarial review in 3 years' time, depending on the performance of the pension fund. And I think particularly in view of the financial circumstances that we have with COVID-19, I think we have to be cautious that we could see a payment reintroduced for that in a couple of years' time. And then finally, I just wanted to quickly mention the reserves, which are shown in Appendix 4, in paragraphs 40 to 47. And it was just to bring out that as at the end of March 2020, the revenue reserve balance had reduced to virtually nil. It's already budgeted to increase to £17,000 by the end of the current financial year, and up to a budgeted £52,000 if the proposed increase to the income budgets is approved and for it to be added into the revenue reserve. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions people may have.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And the first hand that's gone up is Councillor Quantrill.
One for the future, and possibly for Jason and Alison to consider, is what's our future planning strategy for income if the COVID emergency and the likelihood of an economic downturn takes place through, let's say, early part of next year? How will that affect our income planning?
Thank you. Jason, do you want to comment?
Thank you for that. A very important question. When the lockdown started, of course, one didn't know for how long it would continue. And we faced this black hole, if you like, of £45,000 visitors fees that we would lose. So we looked very closely at that early on. And with the additional income that we managed to bring in this year, and a couple of economies within spending of money on slipway clearances, etc., because people wouldn't be using those slipways, I thought that we could be just about at zero balance, so we could almost lose most of that and be safe. we've recovered quite nicely with that over the course of the past 3 months, as I've explained. And of course, the more we eat into that £45,000, the better off we'll be, and hence Jenny's forecast, which looks quite favourable at this stage. For next year, we don't know how things will pan out. We know that in the next item, we'll be talking about the Harbour dues setting for next year. And I think this presages that conversation quite nicely. There's an element of prudence because we know the things that we have to do, and the things that we have to do are the marine safety management elements of it. There are other things in building modification, etc., in the amounts of work that we do in terms of our daily routine. So maintaining the shorter office hours that we've done this summer has actually balanced out quite nicely. So there are small steps like that that can be taken to make sure that the books do balance. But it's a living discussion in my head every day, thinking about little steps that we can take and economies that we can take without losing what we need to do. I'm always open to ideas, and I'm aware that there are members around this table today who will have ideas. No monopoly on good ideas. We've discussed in our finance paper of last year how we've borne down on expenditure. That is one lever we can pull, and we've done that as far as we reasonably can. Some of the modifications we would like to do on pontoons, etc., we might defer. Some of the recruiting of additional staff over the summer we might have to not do, and it's those little steps which, taken together, will defer the pressure on the budget next year. But I think this plays nicely into the next conversation we'll have about the setting of harbour dues for next year.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Anybody else got any questions, queries, comments they'd like? John Selby.
Yes, noting the additional cost from the seasonal vacancy, did that come about due to COVID, or are we having problems in finding suitable staff?
Okay, Jason.
Thank you, John. Apologies if I haven't made that clear in the past, which I probably should have done. What happened with the timings on the lockdown was that we had we'd already placed our advertisement, as we do every year, for seasonal staff, and we had over 30 applicants, and we were down to the interview stage at that point when the lockdown started, which meant that we could not interview people, and nor could we take them out. Part of the interview is taking them out to give them a test on the patrol boats to see whether they could. A twofold reason, really. One, to see how good they are at driving a boat, and whether they have the potential to do what we ask of them. And the second thing is to see whether they fit the organisation and we fit them. And we were unable to do that. It's not for a lack of applicants. I'd like to reassure everybody that that's not so. It was simply COVID this time round.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, okay, well, I'm not seeing anybody else wishing to speak. Can I make a little request? If Rupert Curl and Tonya Craig, if you have your videos on, I'll be able to see you as well on the screen. In case you raise your hands or something at any point, that'd be lovely, because this amazing system lets me see absolutely everyone if they've got the cameras on. Right, we're now going to move to make a decision then on the recommendations which you have before you. Now, on these two finance items, we do need to do something a little more formal than just be saying, shout if you've got a problem. So I'm going to now ask Emma to deal and see how well her voting system works. So over to you, Emma, and I'll propose that we agree the recommendations and just ask for a seconder. I can see anybody. Anyone going to second me? Thank you to Councillor Rod Cooper. So we'll now ask Emma to deal with finding our assent.
Thank you, Chairman. So I just need to ask, are there any members who wish to vote against the recommendations? No. Are there any members who are wishing to abstain from the vote altogether? No. And then just a verbal indication, a sort of a hubbub from you, are members agreed with the recommendations? If I could just hear from you.
Agreed.
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 Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. So the recommendations are agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. That was painless. Right, we'll now then move to the next item on the agenda. So this is item 9, which is a review of Harbour dues. Now, of course, a number of people do have interests in this, but I have reminded you previously that we have been given a dispensation for members who do have what would otherwise be a disclosable pecuniary interest if they are payers or indeed recipients of Harbour dues. But there is that dispensation, so everybody is able to speak and vote on this item. So this is at page 83 in the agenda, so if you can have that at hand, and the recommendation is for approval of an increase in Harbour dues of a very modest 2%. So I'm going to ask Jason to present this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Last year, when we increased Harbour dues by 5%, there was much gnashing of teeth from me, as well as anybody else, that was quite a large amount. But looking at the figures that Jenny has earlier presented, I think the prudence of that, and acknowledging that we were still 3% less than we were in terms of Harbour dues 10 years ago, it didn't quite look so bad. We still have a very strong waiting list, and there is a good deal of movement in berthing that's taken place over the course of the summer. So I think the market, if you'll forgive the pun, is buoyant in that sense. And it's good to see as well that businesses are working so hard to provide the services that people need. But the challenges that businesses face is not lost on us either. Prudence is a word that, and uncertainty is another word that really feature in this debate. The board have advocated in the past that we increase fees very lightly each year, just to keep on top of the pressures, which we've already discussed and seen, and Councillor Quantrell's already asked the question about what if. There are lots of what ifs. So this report attempts to strike a balance between real prudence and a recognition that everybody in this COVID crisis is suffering from uncertainty, also suffering from financial pressures. Now, it may well be that some of those are first world problems in a sort of rather blunt way, but nevertheless, these are people's lives that we're dealing with when we put extra increases upon them. So the figure of 2% sits in this, which effectively represents an increase of £10,000 in terms of income. Now that £10,000 has to be looked at against the profit, not profit, surplus that we will look to put into the revenue reserve of next year of £17,000. But as Jenny said, that is there are assumptions in that, assumptions that the restrictions that we're now this week seeing come into place will not expand and will not expand and have an effect on our income. And we don't know that. There is a temporal imperativity in making this decision at the next board meeting, because it sets the charges for the invoices which are issued on the 1st of October. So this decision cannot be deferred. The last thing I'll throw into the mix with this before opening for questions, because everybody's had an opportunity to mull over the content here, is that the Crown Estate yesterday decided, uniquely in my time in office, to apply a nil increase in mooring fees for next year. That has never happened before in my time. Normally it is in the region of 2-3%. So splitting out what the Crown Estate need and what the Harbour Authority needs is an important thing to do too. But I think this will be viewed by our customers in that context. So there's a balance to be struck, and an important discussion among this group who have a good deal of wisdom on how this is likely to be received. Between something at the right end of the spectrum is 2%, and something at the left at the left end of the spectrum, I would suggest, is something around about 1%. We do need an increase, I think, because we cannot defer any debate on prudence. We don't know what's coming, but it's the amount of the increase and the impact that it will have on river users. The more so in the light of the Crown Estate's decision yesterday to make to recommend a 0% increase. 2% is not, that still leaves us at 1% less than was 10 years ago, well, 11 years ago now. So that's the other part of it. I just open it for discussion, and members will have thoughts on the importance of prudence versus impact on river users. That's my bit.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Jason. So over to committee members now. If anybody would like to comment or question, please raise your hand. And as I'm not, there we go, Councillor Rod Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of one of the clubs on the river, we've noticed a drop-off in the take-up of moorings, and it's been reasonably significant. How you mentioned earlier that the waiting list was strong. Has there been any significant movement upwards or downwards since coronavirus has affected us, or are we very similar in numbers?
Thank you. This meeting is taking place 2 weeks after the issuing of the waiting list invoices for the next year. The initial response to waiting list payments, which are variously either £10 to remain on the waiting list or £30 to remain on the waiting list, has been strong. So I think at the moment we're up to 2 weeks in with 450 waiting list places. We're probably we've probably had a third of the responses already. The deadline for it is at the end of this month. But the initial response has been pretty strong. Now, that means that the invoice of £30, £10 is not going to break anybody's bank. The real truth is when we come to reallocate moorings, and there is a constant stream through of reallocation of moorings at the moment and new customers joining the waiting list. So I would say, really, having set that context, that I think the waiting list remains consistently strong. We are a competitive river. When you look at other harbours, we are still pretty economical. And if you want to keep your boat somewhere, then this is as economical a place as any to do it.
Thank you very much.
The pressures are, however, acknowledged on clubs, and I am aware there is a hierarchy of moorings around the river, and as certain moorings in certain, such as certain more expensive moorings are vacated, then other moorings top up, and it filters on down the line. So we watch that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Quantrill.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. Yeah. I take the prudence caution very greatly, but I don't think the 2% is going to make a great deal of difference in the elasticity of demand. So I support the 2%. Over at Hayling Island, we've actually seen things booming as people are not taking foreign holidays, and revenue at the Beachlands car parks, for instance, and in all the holiday centres has actually rocketed up. There's 98% now capacity taken up of the forward bookings for the next year at the holiday centres, and similarly water activities are buoyant, as you put it, as well. So I think 2% is a gamble, but it's one which I think we should take, because if the Crown Estate's option of 0% is taken, they lose that 2% for the rest of the future. So well done, Jason. Let's be brave, and let's hope that things turn for us rather than against us.
Okay, thank you, Lance. Jason, did you want to say something else?
Yes, I mean, as Councillor Quantrill was speaking there, in my report I talked about the jet ski influx to the river and launches from the slipway here. Part of the reason for the closure of the figure in terms of visitors, launching fees, etc., has been the influx of jet skis which we've inherited from adjacent slips that are closed. While jet skiers are in some ways not the most popular of people on the water in certain quarters, they are exceptionally good at paying their launch fees. So much so that on a given Saturday, a very hot day back in the start of June, I arrived on a Monday to find out people's jaws on the floor, because we had taken £1,250 in terms of launch fees from Warsash Slipway. Now, when I say that a jet ski launch around here, because we're simply not used to them, is £5, that will tell you how many jet skis and boats were launched from that slipway on that day. That is the level of activity, and it's that level of activity. It's not been that strong since then, but we've had some good days where we've brought in good amounts of money, and that gives me optimism, because I think people like coming down. They like the simplicity of chucking a boat in the water or a craft in the water and getting out and doing it and then coming back. It offers them, they can get on with the rest of their lives then. And I think your point about people staying at home, not going away. I'm not going on holiday this year, so I'm going to spend a couple of £1,000s on a boat. They do that, and they're using them.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I don't see anyone else wishing to speak, so we'll now move to the recommendation, which is for what appears very modest 2% increase, which I don't think we're going to have any particular issues with that. So that would be the recommendation to the Harbour Board. So can I see a seconder for that, please? There seem to be a few there to choose from. I'm sure Emma will choose one and hand over to Emma to extract what information she needs to make that decision.
Thank you, Chairman. So same process again. Are there any members who are wishing to abstain from this vote? No. Are there any members who are wishing to vote against the recommendation? Can't hear anybody. And are therefore all members in agreement with the recommendation? If I could have a hubbub of a yes or agreed.
Yeah. Yes, Chairman.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation is agreed.
Okay, thank you for that, Emma. So we now move back to the main agenda and we move to the final item, which is the forward plan for future meetings. And this is really an item for information which we're asked to vote. So you can see the management committee dates, the Harbour Board dates, and as the pandemic permits, we will try and ensure that there are appropriate briefings dropped in for members as well. So that really is for noting. So unless anybody's got any questions on that, can I just see an assent that that is agreed? We note that report. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, everybody. So that now brings us to the end of the meeting, so we can cease the webcast.